Hi. Now we're gonna talk about well-commented code and what that is, and also about something that I call self-commenting code. In this case, we see a class that is not well-commented, and for several reasons. Okay, the first reason that it's not well-commented is the name of the class is called class underscore the name of the file is called class underscore checkers, and this file actually contains several class files, and that is always a bad idea. The name of the class and the name of the file should always be the same. And since we do object-oriented PHP, I'm not that interested in files that do not contain any classes. So by standard, every class should, or every file should contain one class. Usually you should just move this into this part of the code into a separate class file named parser counter, but I just remove it because I'm not really interested. That was just a simple example. So that is the first thing that we're gonna write down, and one class per file, and file name and class name should be the same. So we're gonna rename first this file into cparser. But cparser in itself is not a good name. In order to find a good name, we must try to understand what this class does. So what it does is that it takes a piece of code as an argument here into a method called code, and then it parses that code, and it finds out the first line of comment in that code, and it's just looking at these one-line comments. So if we parsed this file with this class, we would find the first line of comment here, right? Because it starts with these double slashes. So maybe this should be a comment finder or something like that, and I would rename it to PHP comment finder. That way, what the class does and what it's named is the same. And of course, I need to rename the file now. Now we have a PHP comment finder. Okay, here is actually a usage example of just a double slash comment. I removed that since it has nothing to do with the namespace. The namespace here is called helpers, and we can see this sometimes in PHP files that some programmer wants to have his helper classes, but this really is in the same way as the class name and the file name should be the same. The namespace name and the folder name should be the same. So I will actually rename this namespace into comments. And then we actually have a good thing here, that we have a member variable here, and it's private. That tells me that you cannot access this private member from outside, so that is actually a good thing. The name of the variable here is CHRS, meaning characters, and really this is some kind of text, and I would rename this into PHP source code, because that is what I want it to be. And yeah, then I change everywhere so that the code will still work. And then we have these arguments, and this argument says just, okay, this is the first argument 0. the first argument, and that is not a very good name. So maybe a better name would be PHP source code here also. It says that, okay, a PHP source code comes in and then saved into this private member. I try to avoid that the same name comes in here and has a member variable, because it's very easy to forget this like that, and then you have a bug in your code, or that can be quite hard to find. So maybe we just change this name into PHP source. Also, we might want to enforce in some way that this is actually a string. It must be a string. If you send something else than a string, the code will not react on that. I'm gonna show this by adding an assert. Assert is a method in PHP that can be turned on and turned off. I usually only have them turned on, and I will use this method, isString. This will tell me that whatever comes in here, since PHP does not have a string class, we cannot use the name of the class here. We cannot write string here, because that will result in a parsing error. But by adding an assert statement, I can make sure that if a programmer sends something to this class, it will result something else than a string. It will result in an error. And yeah, so that little line is also working as a documentation, right? Because a programmer that reads this line and know what an assert does and know what a string does should see that this is a string. If we're not confident that someone will see that, we can always add a comment for the method. If I would write a comment for this method, sets the source code that should be parsed, and then I can document what kind of input that comes in, and I can say that PHP source is a string, and I can write a description, a PHP source code string. Okay, this is not a very good comment, right? And it's not a very good comment because it really says the same thing as this one. So since the same kind of information says here, this is a string and this is PHP source, then I can just remove that. It's unnecessary to have that kind of description. This one has no return value. We can say that it returns void, or even better, we can remove that line. Now, the name of this method is not very good. It should be like something that I wrote up here, set source code. Is a better name, because if I have that name, set source code, maybe set source code for parsing, then the same kind of information that is up here is actually in this name. It becomes a bit long, but then I can remove that also. It can be quite nice to also comment the member variables. In the same way as down below, since I've already used a quite descriptive name here, I don't need to comment the name of that comment very much, so I will just say that, okay, this is also a string. And yeah, so I will go a little bit lower, and we can see in the same way here the programmer has basically commented what this method does, and it parses um, the line of comments. So this really says nothing about what the method does. So instead, maybe we could have some kind of a better description. But in order to write that, we must understand what this method does. So let's do that first. This one explodes a string by end line. Okay, what this does is it takes this source code string and divides that by all the end lines in it, and the result of that is an array of strings. So each line of this is a string. So maybe we could source code lines so that it's not just an array, it's source code lines. And we can always check what explode does, and if you have been programming for a little while in PHP, you know that explode does this. So we can always Google for explode and PHP and understand how that works. Just to show you really quick, we can just see that, okay, this is the manual for explode. So it's someone has already documented that. I don't need to do that. And then this is another really bad comment. Go through the array. It's okay. It's a for each loop, and I send it an array. For each always goes through an array. It does not say anything. And then we have these key and value. When I generate a for each in Sublime, I get these key value things. So it's just automated lazy code. So the key is the position or the key for the first position, for the second position of this array. So it's really the line number. And this one will start with 0 when we have done explosion of a source file. So this will be the line number, and this will be source code line, the current line that we're parsing. So instead of value, we can have string position of the source code line of that, what we're looking for. And the same thing goes for this line. Check for position of double slash. That is exactly the same thing that that we're doing, or already the code writes. So we're not supposed to comment what the code does, because the programmer can read that, especially if we have a good naming strategy. So then we can use this line number, and this is a good thing to comment, really. You see here is +1. Why is it +1? That is something that is not self-explanatory by the code. So here we might want to have line of code starts with 1. Explode gives 0. So that way we're explaining something that is not self-explanatory. So we must add 1 to the line number in order to get the line of code. You can see up here in Sublime, at least, the line number starts with 1. So I want to mimic that behavior. This is really crucial information. When you're going to use this method, you're going to want to know that the number that you get starts with 1. So actually the return type of this method is an integer, and I can also write a description that it starts with 1. and then I can omit this explode because that is something that is into this. Okay, so now I know what the method does really, but below we have some error corrections. We're gonna go through that also. But now that I know what, and you know what this method does, we can write a description for it. Get line number of the first one line comment. Yeah. And then I just give a short example here that, okay, one line comment starts with double slashes. Okay, if we have this, get line number of the first line comment, maybe that is a better name. Get line of first one line comment. Bit long. Maybe if we don't have any other kinds of methods in this class, maybe we can shorten it, like get first comment or something like that. But I kind of like these descriptive names. If this first line comment is something that we use a lot in our program, and it sort of becomes a part of our vocabulary, and maybe we're starting to use like flock or something like that. Maybe if that is very commonly used, we can use a shorter version of this. But for now, I think that we should actually have one of these long comment names because it says what it does. Okay, and let's go and talk about the error here. So the error strategy here is that if there is no line of comment in this entire parsed source code, then we should say that, okay, did not exist, and the author of this method said that, okay, maybe it should return -1. That is not really good idea. -1 is a number, so if we have some kind of calculation on perhaps how programmers are placing where the programmers are placing their first lines of code in a lot of source code files, and we're doing some kind of calculation using these numbers. This number will actually work with that code, and we will never perhaps detect that error. Let's check a usage example for using this class. Now we've changed the names of a lot of files here, so we've changed the namespace to comments, and we changed the name of the class to PHP comment finder, and we've changed the name of the set source code to set source code for parsing, and oh, that one did not take and then we have also this get line of code. Yeah, so if we see how someone is using this class, we can see that he's first creating an instance of the class, and then he's configuring that, initiating that instance by setting a source code. We can see here we are loading source code, actually the test case here. And then from that source code we can extract the first line, and then we get a number back. And since we're handling errors by returning something, we are forcing the programmer to add an if statement here, checking that if the line is -1 or not. And if the line is -1, he wants to print out the error, and in the code you can see that he placed the error in a global super global variable, and that is almost always a bad idea. And he also placed this variable in a special location in this global variable, and that is also a good idea. So we must find a better strategy for finding errors. And I think that since this is an error in this case, I think that it should throw, or the code should throw, an exception. And this exception could contain this information like that. So there's an error, we did not find any line of comment, and or there is an exception raised, and that way we can remove this code and we can let the programmer handle that error in a special location in the catch phrase. Like that, and then he can echo that error. So, and this is a better way of handling this, these errors. There is something that I find irritating with this class still, and this is that in order to parse this code, I must first create a instance of the class and then configure that, and then if I don't configure that, I don't get the right behavior. If we comment out that class, we can create an faulty state that does not lead to correct behavior. So I don't like that really. I would write this code like this instead, that a PHP comment finder must have a source code. So if you're not sending source code to a PHP comment finder, you would you're actually doing some kind of error, and I want that assert to tell me that I'm doing an error. And then when you've correctly created an instance of that class, then you can call these methods on the class, but you can never create an instance of a class that is not correct. So I will actually move this code into the constructor, and in PHP the constructor is called construct, and yeah, the same thing applies. We can have this assert, and we can remove this. This is another thing that was in the original code, that we had a commented out var dump here. This is some kind of testing code, or should symbolize testing code. And I've commented out some other code that was just old code. And this is always a bad idea. There's no reason to keep this code. If I would want to keep this code, I should do that on Git, right? I should have a commit with that code live on Git. But in this case, it's just distracting. Okay, so now I've rewritten this this piece of code, and before I before I'm finished, I just want to test that. Since I've done so many changes, I want to make sure that it's okay. So I will test run this code, and so just go to the folder, and then from that folder I have the index file. So I ran the PHP command line tool on that, and we can see that, okay, I've forgotten to change the name of the require once. So that was the first problem. Let's see if we can find any other problem. No, it really worked. Okay, so it found a comment on line 3, and that was what I expected, because in the test case we have a comment on line 3. Okay, so let's try these error handling things. So the first thing could be that there is no comment in the file. We should see that we get this exception thrown. And we can see that, okay, no line of code comment found in the code. And another error was that the code is not a text string at all, it's just something else. And let's make sure that we get an assert, because this is a programmatic error. We're sending something of the wrong type to this. So this should give us this warning: assertion failed on that line, on line 16. Asserts are quite good, and I like to use them to make sure that I get the correct inputs into a class. And you can also dress up this error message a little bit by writing your own error message after here. First argument was not a string. When I read this I do understand that this is what it happens, but by writing this little part I can document to the person running the tests, right? So now I get this information here, and I do not need to open that file in order to find that kind of information. So suddenly this information becomes visible from outside. Now let's just see what happens if I remove this and still have a number that I send to this. So it's going to try to run the code, and you can see that I just get this normal error message that, okay, no line of comment found in code. And that is pretty bad, that I send something that is not a string and it seems that the code works. Okay, that was all.